The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. Hi, I'm your host, Sarah Elkins. I call myself the Chief Storymaker at Elkins Consulting because the only way to have good stories to share is when you're making them every day. So just a quick reminder for our listeners, if you're interviewing for a job, our new course, Get Hired Job Interview Storytelling, is available for just $199, which includes the course as well as small group storytelling practice sessions. So if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that I dive deeply into topics of authenticity, identity, and relevance. And you are going to love our guest this week, Lynn Rivest. Rivest. It's a French name, and I love to be able to roll those R's. Lynn, thank you so much for spending time with me today to record this episode.
Thanks, Sarah. It's my pleasure. Also, bang on with the rolling the R. That's awesome.
Well, my grandmother on my dad's side was a Francophile. She loved everything French, and she spoke French, German, Yiddish, Hebrew, and English. She was actually born in the U.S., but she spoke all those languages. And my father's name was Roland Lucien.
Ah, yes.
Everybody called him Raleigh.
Yeah, nice.
So, yes, we love French names around here. Lynn, it's such a pleasure to have you on as a guest because after our first conversation, just when we decided to get to know each other a little bit, I knew you were going to share some really good nuggets with our audience today. So thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, okay. Let's bring on the nuggets. I hope I've got some.
My husband doesn't like it when I call them nuggets because he grew up all over the world, but was born in Washington, D.C., same as I was. But I spent most of my time in Colorado. So nuggets are like gold, right? But in D.C., a nugget usually refers to something a dog left on the sidewalk. So
isn't that funny? Yeah, there's those localized versions of words, right? For me, nugget is a nugget. It's a good nugget of gold. But I don't know why. I mean, nothing like Colorado happened near Toronto. But it's the same with like pop, soda, how you say those things. It's funny to me. I didn't know about nugget.
Yeah. Well, you told me it years ago, but it didn't stop me from using that word.
Well, I'm with you on it, so.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So, Lynn, I always begin by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people probably don't know about them. And I do this because I love to give some context into slightly deeper understanding of the guest before we start diving into our stories. So do you have something you can share with us?
Yeah, one thing that I'm glad you helped prepare for this because I feel like I talk about almost everything, in my life, like on social media, no filter or some filter, but not a lot. So I was like, ooh, what have I not shared? So it's nothing crazy, but at around 43, I took cello lessons. This is something that I haven't talked about that much. Some of my friends, of course, know, but I love the cello. Strings move me like no other instrument, like to the point of like tears, just being so moved. And the cello being one of my favorites. So at 43, I was like, I'm just going to take lessons just for me. I'm going to one-on-one lessons with somebody in my neighborhood. And I just loved carrying that cello around, like, look at me, get out of my car. This is an important instrument because it's big. I just thought, like, look at all the signals I'm putting out. I'm creative. I'm a musician, and anyhow. So I fell in love with the idea of it. Now, I did do it for about 8 months, practicing my chord. I did practice. I was a good practicer and played, the Suzuki books, like probably the third one. And I was never great. And I never got to vibrato, like the quick finger kind of movement or anything like that. But what I learned about that was really important for me was that there's a big difference between appreciation and desire. So that there are many things you can appreciate in life. Like I super appreciate the strings and the cello. And I didn't need to make it something I want. Like it didn't transfer to being something I wanted. because while I enjoyed the challenge of a new instrument, and mind you, I had only played the trombone and the recorder before that as a kid, I realized it made me appreciate it more, which was great. But I also realized you don't have to make it something more. It can be just what it is. So yeah, after 8 months I stopped, but it was a really good lesson.
That's so cool. There's so few people that would take that on as an adult. I'm super impressed. And you said you played the trombone before the recorder was probably 5th grade.
Yeah, recorder is in primary. Yeah.
Right. And the trombone, how long did you play that?
Just for 1 year, we had band. We never had band where I grew up in Northern Ontario. When I moved to in Toronto, they had band like on TV. And I always thought, wow, kids in school have band? We just didn't have that. It was just too small a town. And I was so excited. I wanted to play the flute. That was my dream. But there was a boy who played the trombone who I really liked. If there was one thing I wasn't more keen on than books, it was boys. and I knew I would get to sit beside him during all these band practices. I did not like the trombone at all. It doesn't have the kind of thing I like in an instrument. Now, there were some fun things about it for sure, but it wasn't, you never got to play the tune. There were things that I was, if I'd had
like a bass line, it is never the melody.
Yeah, but it was still really interesting to learn. I did not go out or do anything with that boy, but that was the last time I learned an instrument. We just didn't have money to do lessons outside of the home, so I was glad to have that exposure anyway. But
yeah, you knew I was going to ask, what happened with the boy? I know, I was boy crazy. I think I'm still people crazy. Yeah, I mean, there are times where I just like crave being around different people and finding whatever is magical about them. I still do that.
So great you have this podcast.
Yeah, I know. It's awesome. I'm so lucky. Yes. So I keep coming back to this whole idea of taking trombone for a year because there was a cute boy. I love the trombone and I would love to learn to play. We actually have a trombone in our house. We have a lot of different instruments in our house because we're musicians. And my husband is one of those people that can pick up pretty much any instrument and start playing it. But trombone hasn't been so easy. Right. Not that he practices it a lot because he plays guitar with a couple bands. So that pretty much keeps him busy. But we found that when we have deer in our yard eating our garden, all we have to do is take the trombone and make some loud noises with it and they go away.
I love it.
Yeah. So, and yes. And exactly. We're not poisoning them. The trombone is also one of my favorites because I love the music of New Orleans. And trombone plays
it's good, Sarah. It's really good.
Oh, yes.
I did not play it well.
Treme was a great TV show. I highly recommend it. The music alone, it's worth watching just for the music alone, but it's a fantastic show.
Great.
Anyway, so you took on the cello and again, just a little aside, my grandmother played the cello for the Wilmington, Delaware Symphony.
Oh, wow.
And my son Jacob chose cello for middle school band, symphony, and has a great ear. And I'm really hoping he'll go back to it at some point. But you're right, the cello is a phenomenally beautiful instrument. And I love the depth of its tone. Yeah. When it's done right. Yes. So why you love all strings, but you picked cello as opposed to viola or bass or I can't imagine you picking up a violin if you didn't pick up the flute. So why the cello?
Well, the violin I love as well. I didn't do the violin only because that's something my daughter had taken up. And at the time I was like, we're going to have different instruments. Also, just the cello really again, the violin also moves me. But there was something about if I pay attention to the strings, the cello would be the instrument that just kind of floated above for me. Mm-hmm. And in particular, I had been to a few concerts, but one in particular was Ludovico Einaudi, who is a modern classical, a minimal modern classical pianist, composer. Lots of his music has been now used in soundtracks and that kind of stuff, so he's recognizable. But this was when he was kind of newer around here. A friend of mine had introduced me to him, and we went to a small venue in Toronto. And it was piano, it's very minimal. Piano, I think there were 3 cellos and 3 violins. And when the cellos came, the violins too bring me to tears, but when the cellos started, we were both kind of almost sobbing from the just beauty of it. Yeah, as I remember it. And I just thought I want to be part of that. Like I do feel it. I feel the vibration, but I want to hold it. And there's something about holding the cello too, right? As opposed to the violin. Felt more embodied.
Yes. Well, it's like a hug. You're embracing.
Like a hug. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And I can see it in the work that you do and the way that you embrace what you do. I could see why the cello was so appealing. How have you applied that lesson that you can love and value and feel something without having to be in it?
Well, with kind of like what you were saying with people, I mean, that sounds bad. I don't want to be in people, obviously, but it removes the kind of jealousy or envy a lot of the time. You can fully just appreciate another human doing something that you're never going to do, but that you get to relate with them on it in some way nonetheless. You can be quite different, but there's always this embodied experience, something about it that comes up between 2 people who are really communicating, connecting. And I think it's similar to that. It's like it's just that appreciation for we're all making our way here. And yes, in different ways, but there's so many things that are similar. So I can appreciate, I love being able to not quite live somebody else's life, but experiencing it through the way they tell it. And as you say, through stories. Yeah. So that, as I've gotten older, has gotten much better. I, used to be like, well, I can't really have that, or well, I'll never be, a doctor. I'll never get to, now I'm just like, I get to talk to them and appreciate it a lot more.
I hear that. I think, I know that I went through that also in my younger years. It wasn't until I was probably in my mid to late 40s that I could acknowledge that genuine appreciation and joy and celebration of what somebody else was doing. Mm-hmm. And even if it's something that I want to do or I do, right, there's still, and honestly, I still every once in a while get that edge of envy.
Yes, and of course.
And it seems though that as I've gotten to more comfort in my skin and faith that I'm where I am supposed to be, that I can, it switches very quickly now from envy to celebration, from envy to learning, and from envy to gratitude for where I am. I wonder if that's an age thing or if there are people, I don't know. I don't know a lot of young people that do that.
I don't either. And I would say I love the distinction you made there, or I also love the nuance you brought to it, because definitely not an across the board. I am so happy for everybody and I never have any envy. Of course not. But it becomes a cue. It becomes I'm feeling this edge, and you can lean into the interesting. That's something for me to pay attention to. It doesn't mean anything about that person, right? Like I don't have to not like them for that. Well, not that that's what it was happening, but I think it is an age thing. There are probably some younger people thinking like, of course I've got it figured out. But I would say when I was younger, I was still pretty self-aware. It wasn't like I wasn't checking in, but I didn't have just time and the experience of time and also that feeling of finitude that you have a lot more as you age. You're like, I have less time in front of me than I do behind me. That makes a big difference, right? We are in time. Time is relative. So it's part of that equation. If there's an equation, I don't think I think you can have a proxy for it up until a point where you can try really hard to overcome any kind of envy, and you can be aware of it and say, oh, I really feel good for that person, and not quite be there. And I hear you when you say, when I really felt it, I wasn't just trying to be a good person. I really felt it. I was like, oh, I'm actually really happy for this person. So yeah, that's my theory anyway.
Well, I had a conversation with my friend Valerie Gordon about this, and she's a storytelling, I forget how she calls it, but she's amazing at helping people, guide them toward a better story brand and a narrative about themselves and their businesses. And we were talking about our books, and I had just published mine, and she was still working on hers. And she's like, she calls them the uglies. And no, not the uglies. Unlikelies. That's what she calls them. The unlikelies. And these are the things that on the face of them are unlikely, or you don't think about them as motivating factors. And envy is one of them. And spite is one, that I don't have to explain that to anybody. But the envy one, we were talking about that, and she said, my unlikely is showing up, and seeing that you've published your book, it makes me really want to publish mine. And I said, you have so much to offer. There's plenty of room for you.
Right. And
she came back to me months later and said that was really important for her to hear, that there's room for you. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes you say things that you are glad they bring other people comfort, but you don't really fully process it yourself until you hear it come back at you.
That's right. Yeah.
And when it came back at me, I started using that for myself to deal with that edge of envy. There's room for me. There's still room for me. What I bring is different. How I approach this is different.
Yep. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Goodness. That's deep. So I would love to come back to what you do and why this whole experience of taking on the cello and moving, I can associate this, taking on the cello and making adjustments and then deciding that that's not what you wanted. I can associate this with when you decided to go and do your own thing in business, and that you chose something particular that you loved and you're already good at, that you could just keep getting better at. So without telling us what you do, I'd love for you to tell us what you do by sharing a story about a recent, satisfying situation with a client.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I would say, right. So recently, a client of mine was talking about, the things she could delegate, the things she wanted to do more in her business. And there was resistance, as there is, because these are, people who are entrepreneurs tend to be obviously generalists, a lot of them. They can do it all. They can do it, so they think sometimes better than anybody else. And I shared with her something that I had just read, which was that growth and control don't mix. You can't grow when you're trying to control something, too much. And so that helped her. Just sometimes it's the right thing, you happen to have read something that resonates with you, you share it with a client, and it just it really lands with them too. Sometimes not, but often the thing that you're doing is the right thing for the people you're working with. That freaks me out sometimes, how that happens. It's just the best. These things coming together. And in that moment, she made the decision. She's like, you're right. I can delegate this one thing that was a bigger thing, like a visible public thing. She had somebody she could do that with, and she just felt really great about it. And now that webinar that this person she gave to it went really well, and it just clicked for her. So yeah, that again, I guess that's the big thing, is the things we constantly keep learning for ourselves. Even though I have some expertise, that's where kind of the magic happens, when you're both kind of going, wow, isn't this amazing?
Well, I love that. And that's what makes you a good guide
Right.
for people trying to grow their business. That's what makes you such a good guide, is that you're constantly learning and seeing relevant topics and content that then you can share. And the way that you share it, because you know your client, because you're people-centric,
Right.
you know your client well enough and what will resonate with them generally, that you may read the same thing they read, but how you process it and then present it to them is just different enough to have that aha moment for them.
Yeah, this is what I appreciate about all the stories and people sharing and stuff, is the way you look at it. Your perspective can really shift something for somebody else. You may have heard it many times before, but yeah.
And not from the right person or at the right time or in the right way.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, I think about that a lot, like things that my mom told me that I ignored.
Yeah.
Somebody else starved me and I'm like, oh, that's right. I think my mom mentioned that 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
I actually had my kids. So I thought, yeah, they don't see how wise and wonderful I am right now. So when they were younger, it was always in the car. I would say these things that I was like, oh, if they write about me, I hope they say that I said this. Maybe that's like a little too ego-based, but as a joke, I used to say to them, you guys should write a book, things my mom says in the car, right? So take notes. And sure enough, my daughter, not at the time, but later, started to record some of the things I said to her. She's like, Lynn, Mom, not Lynn. Mom, would you like to hear me to reread some of the things I've written for you? And I was like, you're hilarious. She's like, and I keep them here because now she's older. Now she's ready for some of that. And it's like 4 or 5 things in particular, but she really appreciates it. Different time. But yeah.
I thought maybe she was going to tease you and say something like, pick up your socks.
That would have been good. But yeah, in this instance, there was actual stuff. And I probably picked it up from other people. Yeah.
Well, I love that. And I really, it's all about legacy, right?
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to me what people pick up that we don't expect. And then the things that we think are so profound, it just disappears. It's like ether, right? It's gone.
Yeah.
And we think it's so profound. Yeah. And I think about that, especially with the content that I create or that you create, that you write something that you think is so profound and crickets, and then you write something about crapping your pants.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it blows up. Like, I don't know why that happened. But, and listeners, I am referring to an actual post that just was the best. I just love that post. So Lynn, when you think about your work with clients, what is it that you know that you bring? You mentioned to me in our other conversation that you have been working for other people for years, so you haven't started your own business. And that's actually part of what makes you such a good resource for people who are running their own businesses. Tell me a little bit about why that is.
Yeah, so this is something that somebody who's a very successful entrepreneur, I don't remember his name, it doesn't really matter, was actually saying in a YouTube video, the smartest thing any entrepreneur can do is to learn through a startup, through somebody else's business. Before they jump in. And I appreciated that because I always thought like I never created my own real business. I was too scared or whatever, but I never really thought about it as like, this was an amazing learning opportunity in ways that like I might not have done myself like this, So I worked with, I was kind of like, I was a contractor, self-employed with a number of different entrepreneurs, very small businesses. And so I got to see a real variety of approaches and mindsets and, systems and all the things that go into a business with different people. And then I got to help one particular entrepreneur go from about 100,000 in revenue to almost 3 million in the 6 years we were together. So And I was, involved in almost every part of that business. That was a real gift. This is one of the things that's so amazing about these very small businesses. You get to do so much. So and I'm somebody who, I wasn't just doing my work. She called me her sparring partner. I was always looking at it from a system perspective. If we do this, what's the impact on other parts of the business? So I was very aware of how overly complicated things can get because it feels like we're solving problems when we add stuff in. We rarely think, okay, if we're going to do this, what can we stop doing or what can we take away? We generally just keep adding and adding and adding. And we know that from all our systems, right? They're so bloated that because nobody ever stops to think like, should we maybe clean house a little bit somewhere? So I knew that the way I think, it's my approach in life, that I could help entrepreneurs who tend to keep adding because you're still trying to figure out what's wrong. You keep adding another solution. You're not even clear on the problem. So every solution seems like it could possibly be the thing you need. And so you add or you have to. So I knew that I could come in and kind of help that decluttering, that simplifying. Even when I say it, like I just feel so good about like, yeah, let's give you space. For me, it's always, I want you to be able to breathe.
I love that. It reminds me of a session at No Longer Virtual in 2018 in Denver, when a guy named Ben Walker, who owns a multi-million-dollar transcription agency, he said, if you start your business because you're so great and you care so deeply about ABC and you're spending your time doing DE and F, you're leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And being able to, as you say, declutter and really focus in on what you want to be spending your time doing. Yep. And then wherever there are things that you still need to be doing, or it still needs to be done, once you've identified those things, it still needs to be done, but you don't want to spend the time doing it, understanding how to delegate that, not just to delegate it, but delegate it in a way that you can feel that you're letting go of the control in order to make growth, as opposed to letting go of control and just stopping there.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Huh. That is so interesting. And it sounds like you've kind of described your ideal client, but let's go a little deeper into that, because I think a lot about my ideal clients for StrengthsFinder, for the keynotes I do, and for any public speaking engagements I have, or coaching for public speaking. I think about my ideal client, and my first word that pops into my head is curious. Mm-hmm. My ideal client is curious, endlessly curious. So when you think about your ideal client, what does that look like?
Yeah, it is. The thing that's really coming through for me lately is focusing on meaning, on what's meaningful, what matters. So my ideal client is midlife as well. And again, it's this matter of time and what it does. And they really want to grow for various reasons. They are midlife. There's only so much time. It's not like they are, rolling in money. And again, it's partly legacy, wanting to make sure that their children don't have to worry about them, that everything is in place. But also to make money meaningfully. Looking at, okay, what matters about this that I'm doing? So even when it is things that you can't quite delegate yet, that you don't love doing, what matters about it? In the scheme of things, in the business, but also just for you today. I'm a big fan of days that matter, because we can talk about the present moment, but I kind of prefer assuming I'll have the day, which, may not be true, but it's just a better perspective. And just what will make this day matter? Does this matter today? And they really want that deeper meaning behind it. You don't want to kind of live in that land of, does this mean anything? But just checking in. And that's part of where they're at.
And that makes so much sense, because everything that I've been reading and all the clients that I've been working with over the years, the recent years, have been more focused on that than ever before, where they do want purpose. They want to be doing something that matters to their community or to their family, or even, just that internal motivation.
Right.
I think a little bit about Oslam Brooke Errol's work in purposeful business is her stuff. Right. And she works with a lot of different companies, but mostly the larger companies that really are curious about how this can affect their impact in financially and community, environmentally, all of that. So when you think about these clients that really want meaning in their lives and in what they do in order to make income, what's yours? When you think about, I know everything I do is all about encouraging and inspiring self-reflection in the people around me. Everything I do is about that, because I know when people are more self-aware, how they're coming across, how they want to be known, what legacy they want to leave behind, then I know our communities improve. Just straight up, just more people walking around conscious like that will improve our communities. And that matters to me. So in your work, where does that show up? What does that look like for you?
For me, it is definitely to do with what we talked about a bit earlier. It's this acknowledgement of humanity. I know that sounds a bit, I don't know, like a soundbite, but it really is a deep, deep need for me, not just for me, but like the better connections I've had and in my life is that acknowledgement that we all have kind of things coming out of our bodies in the same places, that we, the saying is always like, I put my pants on one leg at a time, like you. And I'm like, I don't know if people put their pants on one leg at a time. That's not a given. That's still a behavior. What we do have in common is this body. Yes, they're different. And yes, there are social, meanings that people put onto them. But when we get to the core of it, the primal, I have real desire and I guess it's a need, but just to connect by saying we are all these vulnerable beings here. And what matters to me is to connect on that level. So yeah, sometimes it'll be a post about crapping my pants, but it's more, it just in conversation, it's just checking in and going, look, person in front of me, no matter what you look like, you've got these bones and this skin, and how weird that this is where we are, but it leaves us super vulnerable health-wise, what's happening around us in our environment. So there's that connection for me. It's like we're very, like, that's our shit. That's something we share. And I know it's different for different people in terms of abilities and all of that. Nonetheless, there's just this, for me, this primal human. And I think we need, or at least to me, need it more now more than ever. Yes, for the uncertainty, that what seems like more uncertainty, although there's always uncertainty, but also with AI and the machines and that where we are there, I just feel like it's so much more important. So for me, that's at the core of it all. It's just that. Yeah.
And that makes sense given the work that you do, because you're working with people who are also maybe just for the first time considering their humanity and their mortality. And maybe this is a time, as you described in your kind of ideal client description, somebody in midlife, 40s, 50s, 60s, thinking about what legacy they're going to leave and how they want to be remembered. And I know I get this. Sometimes people consider that kind of morbid conversation. But to me, it flavors all of our decisions. It informs our choices every single day, the actions that we take and the way we behave and the words that we choose to use for other people. And I would agree. We're at a critical time right now in terms of a lack of connection. And so that makes a lot of sense to me, that's kind of your why, is to guide others to connect like that and make sure that they are checking in and fulfilling those needs for themselves and for the people in their lives, whether they're employees or family members, community.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. So if our listeners wanted to learn more about what you do, particularly the entrepreneurial listeners here that would be interested in checking in with you about what they're doing, making sure their systems are in place and they're decluttering their business lives, how would they get in touch with you? And listeners, don't worry, we will include these links in the podcast show notes associated with this episode at elkinsconsulting.com.
Nice. Yeah. So my website is the best place to go, minimalistbiz.com. And then secondly, it would be where the fun happens, where I met you, is LinkedIn. And if you look for my name, Lynn Rivest, which you will have also, I love to connect with people there. That's where I hang out. And I think there's the most humanity in terms of social media.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It really is interesting how it seems like people are a little more willing to blend that personal and professional on LinkedIn in a way that feels authentic without being excruciatingly vulnerable.
Yes.
Like you see in other social media platforms. And I do use that word for a reason, excruciatingly vulnerable. Lynn, this has been such a pleasure. And I'm so glad we took the time to have this conversation. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been so fun.
Listeners, thank you so much for sitting in with Lynn Rivest and me on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. Remember, you can check out all of my previous episodes wherever you find your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever. It's pretty much everywhere. And listeners, now it's your turn. When you think about the purpose in your work and why you do what you do you need to spend some time decluttering? I know I do.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.